that we don't speak about. I mean, we deal with, for example, the Equal Rights Amendment. But it's something that seems to get lost in conversation, at least I think, in today's world, in 2020. Because again, we hear so much about racial inequality and racial divides, but we don't necessarily hear much about continued gender gaps in pay, in disciplinary action in schools and things of that nature. There is and before I show this video clip specific to the untold story of Black women in the women's suffrage movement, did anybody want to speak to the historical aspect in general before I show this clip? Did anybody have any specific thoughts?
I do.
All right.
Say a couple of things that I think what's striking when you go back and you watch the historical fight for the vote, there was a real battle to try to say that women's voices were distinct from our husbands' voices or our fathers' voices, that just because we had a husband that could vote did not mean that our voices were synonymous with his voice. And so I think that that was a really big idea that people had to get across, that we were just not the same thing as our husbands. And then the second thing is I'm also a college professor. And one of the difficult things to get across to students is the recency of our history with the right to vote, that when my grandmother was born, she did not have the right to vote. And the same thing, I have the same difficulty even with the civil rights movement and the propelling the vote and equal access to it across the South. They like to think about, in their mind, that was like 1,000 years ago, and not their grandfather's, generation. And so to me, I think that one of the things about getting women involved in politics and, to increase their activism is to just talk about, this was your grandmother's fight. And so thinking about it in those terms, I think kind of brings it home that, wait a minute, that really wasn't that long ago that, we were treated as second-class citizens in our own country.
And I'd like to also say one thing about when you mentioned Susan B. Anthony, the interesting part is looking at how they became the progressive group, because they actually took up for women ahead of Black men, because Susan B. Anthony said, the men should not have the right to vote before the women. And so they were like the progressive movement of that era. And I know Melissa knows a lot about that. But we see this happening today with progressives, and how intermixed in races you have a divide as well on who chooses to be progressive and who chooses to be staunch in their conservatism.
That's an excellent point. Any other thoughts?
I heard a lady say the other day in one of the news programs that she was not in favor of Kamala because she did not believe that a woman should serve as president or as vice president of the United States. And I took some time to try to let that mull around my brain to kind of understand why would she feel that way. And I think we as a group still suffer from what I guess I would call the Stockholm syndrome. We have been so captured over the course of historical time that we tend to identify with the captor. And what's particularly difficult for women is this. I found in my life, at least in my career, that the most difficult thing for me to overcome was not necessarily my racial difference, although that was difficult, don't get me wrong, but it was not the most difficult. The most difficult thing to overcome was the fact that I was a woman. And I think as a group, we have some difficulty accepting the fact that we should be treated fully equally in all respects. And I think the extra caution or inner searching that we have has to do with the fact that we are the mothers of the males we are trying to be equal with. And, and sometimes, you know, that is a difficult thing. You don't want to pull that male down. You want the male, at least the one in your home, to be strong. You know, there's a lot of things that go along with that play upon our psyche as females. This has been a struggle that I think includes a whole lot of other factors that sometimes we don't take into account as we move through historically on where we came from, and certainly where we should be today.
Any other thoughts on that?
I would just like to say that I think that we are at a time in our history where there is tremendous opportunity for us as women to come together, to move in a unified fashion to fight for both racial and gender equality in this country, because both are, in my mind, equally significant. And I do feel that women experience substantial gender discrimination in this country, as well as, you all know, racial and ethnic minorities do. And so in this turn of the century, as we continue the movement, or we renew the movement for equality, I think we need to recognize that our strength is in working together on these issues.
So, oh, go ahead.
I'm reading Isabel Wilkerson's book right now called Caste. And she had written a previous book called The Warmth of Other Suns, which was really about the Great Migration of Americans out of the South. And so, you know, I think we've really got our challenge is around dealing with these issues around caste and class and racism, and that are very real. And Dr. Wilkerson, Ms. Wilkerson's book is just, it's fascinating and horrifying, because it really, the things that have been rolling around in the back of your head, she's written them down and sort of given words to how to talk about how our communities and our systems are structured, and the role and subordination of people of.
And I thought,
and the intentionality of that, the driving force and its backlash of the Trump administration over the last 4 years, it's playing out in this election cycle. And so I just really feel like we're now to the point where we actually have to name and claim our history, find a way to acknowledge it, and then also find a way to move forward and value the contributions of people differently. I really do feel like even in Louisiana, we are held back by a white, patriarchal, mean-spirited.
Even in Louisiana?
In Louisiana, I think, you know, I think we really are. And I struggle to know, you know, how to talk about those issues. And I think that's really the challenge as we move forward, is how do we help lift up all voices, educate our voters, and have really hard conversations about the changes we want to see.
You know, oh, go ahead, Tania.
Okay, yeah, so I won't be left out if everybody's gonna. As we strive for equality, one of the things I think we need to reflect on is, what is that supposed to look like? Because certainly, you know, to put it maybe a little oversimplified, we have to be wary of feminism being co-opted by patriarchal capitalism. Originally, feminism wasn't about simply, diversifying the stratified society. It's not about just getting women into positions of power. It's about reshaping our culture and community so that people can have more balanced relationships and be more family friendly and take care of their families and things like that. So, for example, Family Medical Leave Act was part of feminism, right? And it was about making sure that people had a right to be able to take care of their families without being penalized in their employment practices. And I think sometimes we get a little too fixated on, well, we just need more women in executive roles. Well, if the executive role requires a toxic family life, well, then we haven't really changed things much. We haven't made it more equitable at all. We've just diversified in an equitable system.
That's I like that, and that's pretty powerful. So two things that have popped out for me when you were speaking, Melissa, and then when you were speaking, Tania, was, Melissa, you had mentioned the caste system. And typically myself, I don't know if you all are like this. When I think caste system, I just usually default to race or income, and I don't typically think about gender. Is that just me, or is that typical for most when you think about a caste system? And then my question is, if it's typical for most, and it's not just in my head, that when I hear caste system, I do not think about gender at all. Part of me wonders, it's something about gender disparities or the balanced relationship concept that I struggle to grapple with in different ways than just race or income. Go ahead.
Well, just in terms of, like, women were always property. They were the original property. You were the property of your father until you were married, and then you were the property of your husband. When I got married, I didn't change my name, and I just thought that would be the ground. I thought that was the wave of the future, that I was going to be surrounded by women who weren't changing their name. And lo and behold, I'm still, there's not many, most people are still changing their name when they get married. And when I was teaching at LSU, I didn't mention, I was an instructor in the Department of English, and my students would call me Miss. I wasn't a professor, so I wasn't Professor Nyman. I was Miss Nyman, and my students would try to call me Mrs. Nyman. And to make light, I would say, "Oh, you can't call me that because it sounds like I'm married to my brother. So don't call me that," And then I would explain to them. They would be like, "Oh, you didn't change your name," and I would give them a little bit of the history, that it was a possessive. And no, I didn't want to be the possession of someone, and so I kept my last name and went with Ms. And it would be a history lesson to many college students that they were unaware of that fact about the name change and stuff, and the Mrs. salutation.
Yeah, and I think part of what has me ponder a lot on the gender piece in comparison to the race piece or the income piece is that I guess perhaps race is more upfront right now in terms of the national discourse and et cetera. And then sometimes I'll even say this as a school board member. I know one time we were discussing the zero tolerance policy and the impact on Black boys. which is real and true. And I have 2 sons who are now adults, but I have a grandson as well. But there's great disparity in the way that Black females are treated as well, you know. And so then there's this need in me, I guess you can say, where I want to kind of scream out that, yes, I agree, you know, protect Black boys, support Black men, but does it have to be at the expense or at the ignoring of Black girls and Black women? It's something that I'm really
I think that the most frustrating and difficult thing for me is to have Black men do the same thing, discriminatory things against Black women who have stood by them for centuries, who have stood up for them. And I don't want the men to call up and get all upset right now, but the truth is the truth from my perspective, from my viewpoint, and from what I have gone through. Those moments when Black men have decided that my equality was not as important as theirs, I think are the most alarming moments in my life when that comes to surface. And that's why I said earlier that I think the more difficult thing for me to overcome was being a woman, or is being a woman, because of all those extra things that we have to go through to climb the ladder of success, even with our own, dismissing all the racial differences.
And I would just like to add that I think they're just different. I think how they manifest is different. Women experience significant harm with the abuse, the domestic violence and other forms of abuse. Now we see the case going on right now here at LSU, where those students are now coming forward years later to talk about publicly the abuse that they suffered that was covered up. You know, and part of the problem with women and the violence against women is that we suffer in silence. All too often we suffer in silence because we feel we don't have power against our oppressors or the abusers. And so rather than confront it, women just don't report it, or even when they do report it, quite often it gets pushed under the rug.
Kind of like when you mentioned that, then I remembered when the Senate was confirming the Supreme Court justice and all of the sexual assault allegations, and then there was this little small pocket of women that said, you know, they were worried about their sons being falsely accused, and which does happen. I mean, you know, all people are capable of lying, but the proportion of false accusations compared to the, you know, the number of cases that first and foremost don't even get reported, and then we're reported, you know, are handled so poorly to the demise of the victim, it totally outweighs that. But when you said that, Alma, it made me think of that.
Wasn't it 1992? But when they finally got the law off the books that women, it wasn't legal to rape your wife, right?
Yeah,
that was in Louisiana, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it hadn't been enforced in years, but
yeah, I mean,
it was on the books that it was legal to rape your wife until 1992.
Yeah.
The rule of thumb, right?
Yes.
beat your wife with a rod no bigger than the width of your thumb. What, that was the 1920s.
I mean, that's kind of big, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that goes back to what, you know, Belinda mentioned earlier about sort of these young people, young women now at LSU and college don't really have an appreciation that about the head and master laws. And Tania, I mean, you know, what you're talking about that. I mean, that women could not have credit cards or get bank loans or bank accounts or
purchase a
car
house,
insurance or purchase. And, yeah, and this was, you know, until Lindy Boggs, you know, Congressman Lindy Boggs from New Orleans was one of the leaders of that, because after her husband died, she was, you know, finally realized that she had no standing in the world. And so, you know, really the efforts of Professor Spade and others, you know, 40 years ago in Louisiana. But I still think there's some people in the legislature that would vote for head and master laws in 2020, and that want to keep their women, you know, barefoot and pregnant and back in the woods. I mean, it's just fascinating to me that we've not come nearly as I would have thought in terms of expectations for professional as well as economic parity. And Tania, you could probably address this better than I can, but the Equal Rights Amendment almost passed nationally in 1972, and now 50 years later, it's still controversial. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's real short language. Does anybody happen to recall the? I'm gonna pull it up because I think it's important to lift up how simple it is. Understand why it's ridiculous that it is still a barrier.
While you do that, I want to say that I was in Professor Spade's class those many years back, and I was told, at least the women in the class were told, that there was such a thing as headmaster. That was the first time we really understood what that meant, and we had a great deal of questions to ask. Did that mean that the man could sell the property from under us and just do whatever? Yes, that's what that meant. And I remember I had a good friend then, Lila Tridical. Many of you might know Lila from back then. But Lila and I said, well, that's not going to happen. We're not going to let that happen. And of course, we proceeded through the years to become quite active in getting rid of that law in our matrimonial regime, portion of the Civil Code. So, you know, those were, I guess, those were the days when the professors said, oh, we've let these women in, and now look what they're up to.
Exactly. Now they're causing trouble.
Yes. So speaking of, oh well, let me go to that language. I'm sorry, I almost forgot. All right. So it just simply said, oh, wait a minute. Okay. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. That's it. That's it. That's it. And we can't get the required amount of states to sign up to it.
What are the arguments against it? What were the arguments against it when y'all were working to try to get it passed?
It's been a while since I've been to the Capitol on that particular issue. Melissa, you have they brought it up lately?
Oh yeah, they brought it up. I mean, Pat will tell you, she's been one of the leaders on it. And
I mean, I used to go up there, but it's been so long, I don't want to misspeak.
Well, no, I think the question I have is probably for Judge Cooks and maybe Dr. Davis. It's about, you know, there's a sense that do we need the Equal Rights Amendment now? And so part of the opposition to it is that, oh, everything's been fixed. There's not a need for an Equal Rights Amendment. And so, and it's also been very much hijacked by the far right, conservative right to life groups to say something within the ERA, and somehow, even with that very simple language, sort of denotes or requires or has some obligation then that people could have an abortion. And so, I'm continually fascinated by how issues like abortion get yanked into everything else and sort of screw up the conversation. And so, I think the ERA would be perfectly fine, but I don't understand really the fight against it.
Yes, the Equal Rights Amendment in the minds of big business. Let's go there.
Okay, all right.
Almost with the Equal Pay Amendment. And so all of this has to do with ultimately treating women equally in terms of the money you pay them for their services.
Right.
That's what it boils down to. Women for so long work for so much less than their male counterparts, and even today continue to work for less. And so if you really change all these provisions, that's exactly what the fear would be, is that they actually would have to pay you the exact same amount that they pay to males. And so that's why I think overall we've had so much difficulty getting that done. They come up with a million different reasons. Why do you need it? There are laws that protect you already. Well, every time you go to court, we realize those laws do not protect your right to be treated equally or paid equally. It depends.
That is absolutely. I would just say that is absolutely right, Judge. And we have really good evidence that laws are necessary. I mean, if we look at the changes that the U.S. Supreme Court made to the Voting Rights Act, because they said we don't need that anymore, and look at what happened, in the years following that decision, where they have been systematically at the state level chipping away at particularly minority voting rights, that, laws matter. And just because you think we don't need them doesn't make that true.
Absolutely. In fact, they gutted the Voting Rights Act by taking away Section 5. Section 5 is the enforcement provision where a state could not implement a significant change of any kind without pre-clearance. Right. So they took away the pre-clearance section. Exactly. And what that in essence ultimately means is, if a state could go ahead and make all these changes and force you, the citizens, to get together and sue under Section 2, which is still there, under Section 2, by the time you finish doing that, the damage will already have been done. And most people don't have that kind of money to begin to do that. With Section 5, it was the Attorney General of the United States of America, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, that waged the first fight. And the cost of that was paid by the citizens of the United States. Well, there are very few groups that can begin with a Section 2 suit alone without significant financial help. And as I said, by the time you finish with that, the damage will be done, the implementation will be enforced, and it probably take you 10 years to get through the process.
And then you have to go through that all over again because it's a new census count and a new redistricting.
Yeah.
And going back to the legislature, the worst part of putting issues of women towards in front of the legislature is that they get women to go and against. And that's what you see: women opposing equal pay, equal rights for women. They sit there and oppose that, knowing good and well that at some point in time it'll affect their children in some way. But because of that, I guess it's master slave in that situation too, because the guys are telling them they're following the lead of the male counterparts in the legislature to bring all that to the table to talk about. And that's such a shame, because we could have had that resolution passed. I put it up once, and then I think Troy or someone else put it up one other year. And that's always the issue, the right to life, or not the right to life, but Family Forum comes forward.
Yeah.
I think this is a great segue to another point with regards to the difference between having the right to vote and exercising the right to vote. And I want to talk about it in the context of voting in our own interests. What comes to mind for me right now is the constitutional amendment. I think it was Constitutional Amendment 1 that just passed in Louisiana, when Louisiana is already perceived in terms of some aspects, such as maternal mortality, as a third world country. We are passing the most restrictive and regressive abortion laws in the country. You know, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with women about this who simply could not comprehend, you know, what this really meant. In my mind, it's not an ideological issue. It's an issue, another issue about power and control over women by the majority. And I couldn't get people to grasp that, you know, the issues around women's reproductive health have been co-opted by a certain party. And it's become such a politicized issue rather than a health issue that people just, and they co-opted it to make it more of a moral issue, which is so hypocritical, because you're not exercising the same principle when it comes to other issues that you want to claim that you are using around women's reproductive health. It's really about power and control, suppression and oppression. And until we get that as women and we start recognizing that and using our voice and our vote in our own best interest, we're going to stay oppressed.
And then if I could just interject, because when you take what you said and put it in context of the fact that for how many years, Miss Pat, you kept bringing comprehensive sexual education to the table.
Right.
Okay, you don't want people to have abortions. Well, help them not to make the babies in the first place. How about can we make sure they don't make the babies?
Right.
Well, you know, one way to do that is this is how your body works. This is what happens. Simple, basic stuff.
Oh my God. Okay. I ran for the legislature in 1991 because I ran a neighborhood resource center for disadvantaged families up in Shreveport. And one of the things that just killed me was that you had all these young women who potentially could have a really bright future, but somewhere between 14 and 18, their lives got derailed because of unplanned pregnancy. And they didn't have access to health care. They didn't have access to sex education. You know, they had a lot of social pressure around that it was okay to be pregnant at 14 to 16, that type of thing. And it was just heartbreaking. And you know, the different schools and Caddo Parish, I mean, you know, this sort of has been on the radar since like the late 80s. And it's fascinating to me and sort of horrifying that here we are in 2020 and we still don't have accurate, fact-based health education in our middle and high schools. We don't have an opportunity to help young people think and plan strategically for the lives that they want to have. And we have far too many young, even though the teen pregnancy rate has been decreasing for the last decade. You know, it just seems like if you want to be against abortion, that's fine, but you should be for access to prevention and healthcare and family planning. And I never could figure out why all these radical, rabid, pro-life people really weren't on the same page with the prevention, healthcare, education folks. It just makes no sense to me that there's this huge disconnect.
Yeah, because I think we oversimplify. Well,
this makes no sense to me now, that there are people walking around refusing to put a mask on their face.
Right.
That might save not only their own life, but the lives of those around them, from their mothers to their fathers to grandparents. It's beyond me. If you really care about life itself and you seek to preserve it, it makes no sense to walk around without a mask, a simple thing. Yet you intend to tell a woman what to do with her body.
Right.
For the unborn child, but you do nothing to protect the lives of the living.
Right.
We had
Well,
this.
Pat's fought the good fight for years on sex ed and prevention and access to health care. And that's Alma's, basically your whole career has been about this. And it's just so frustrating that we haven't, I don't know what the right levers of power are to sort of flip the script, because it seems like the money and organization is in a far right, evangelical Christian conservative organizations that are happy for people to have kids, but then they don't want to make sure that they've got food, clothing, shelter, parents, or, that it's this pro-birth movement that is so astonishing to me.
Exactly.
And look, there are a couple of chat comments. So let me go back. Miss Jane Chandler, she had first mentioned that the legislature won't even pass a transparency law allowing employees to know the salaries of their colleagues. So they sure don't want women to know how they are being discriminated against. And I'm gonna come back to yours, Alma. And then Foster Ryder said, hi, I worked at an abortion clinic here in Baton Rouge. The amount of women who came into that clinic on medication that cancel out or make their birth control fail was unreal. So then just a simple unawareness and lack of education, and what is that lack of education about when women are given prescriptions that cancel out their birth control. That's real. Thanks, Foster. And then Alma had shared her change.org petition. Go ahead and explain what that link is about. And I'm gonna put it on the Facebook comment thread for anybody that watches later.
Thank you. Sure. One thing that we can do, I believe we can do, is we can establish an entity in this state that has a mission to address these issues. Right now, we don't have a statewide entity, and I'm talking about an office on women's health is what we're advocating for, that has resources, funding, and staff, and a mission to address these issues, and that has some accountability to it. These concerns that we're talking about are not new. We've been talking about these things year after year after year, the income inequalities, the fact that women rank 50th in health outcomes. I mean, I've heard this since I was a nurse back in Shreveport, Melissa, 40 years ago.
I remember.
To date myself.
And we're all holding up pretty well, Alma. We're all holding up pretty well.
Thank you. And things are getting worse. I just heard data from the health department that we've now moved from, for Black women, from having 4 times more likelihood of dying in childbirth to having 5 times more, being more likely to die in childbirth. We're going in the wrong direction. So that's insanity. We've got to do something different. When we see that what we're doing year after year after year simply is not working. So we are really right now working to establish an office on women's health that is funded, that is staffed, and that has a significant coordination function to coordinate the resources and the services, and to do more awareness and public education to address all of these issues, the issues of health specifically, but also the determinants of health that we're talking about, the income inequalities. There's no reason that women aren't paid fairly in this state. And we know that women are on the front lines. We tend to be in the jobs that are the lower paid jobs, and the jobs that are place us more at risk. We see that with the COVID-19 pandemic. Women are the ones in the majority of the jobs that are really serving and facing the people and being exposed, placing themselves and their families at risk of getting COVID-19. So I encourage and invite everyone to really join us in this effort. Please sign the petition. We're trying to get, our goal is really 10,000 signatures. By the time we get to the legislature next spring. We also are recruiting and inviting partners to join us. Please reach out to me, email me. however you on my website, well, let me give my email, alma@lahealthequity.org. Please join us in this effort, because if we're really going to turn things around, we're going to have some kind of dedicated resources and commitment to do so, which we do not have at this point.
Yeah, and Alma, I was going to speak to that. I've already signed on to that that petition you have, but you know the fear of that is that we have a Democratic governor who will basically provide the resources if this is approved in some way, shape, or form for this to happen. The next go round, I'm quite sure we will not have a Democratic governor. And that's what bothers me, because once you look at the funding mechanisms that we have in the state of Louisiana, the only way you can do is to protect it and have it be a stat debt. And they're not going to put a stat debt in for that. And that's what the issues will boil down to, on how they will fund that particular group, because they've been cutting funding out for a lot of different things. But we have to stand tall and be able to go forth with them, because that's how the nurse family practitioner bill stayed in the legislature, because they had defunded it. And it took me and one of the senators who were working with them to stand, because we were on budget committee, and to talk about the fact that that was a genuine effort to actually work with families and to keep that funding in there. But unless you have an advocate for it, that's the issue we have.
I agree with you, Rep. Smith, that we are up against a lot. And I hope that on the federal level, when the new president and vice president-elect come into office, and I'm hoping that the other two Senate seats in Georgia will turn blue as well, so that we can actually get something done. I know that Congress has been working on this issue, and there are a lot of bills currently through the Omnibus and others that address this issue, and much of those bills have funding tied to them. One of the problems in Louisiana is we also don't get our fair share of federal dollars that are available, and we don't maximize and leverage the dollars that we have very well. And so, you know, I know people get upset with me when I say I don't think this is a money issue. This is a political will and public will issue. When we want to do something, we can get it done. There are ways to get it done, but there simply isn't the political and public will to really address and improve these areas. You know, and that's what we as women have to start to demand. We have to stop accepting lip service that, oh, we can't do it. Right. Oh, we don't have the money. Oh, we don't have this or that or the other. Let's get it. We can figure this out. We're all smart people.
Right. That's the power of the vote. We, in many areas of the state as well as this nation, control over 50% of the vote. Yet we are not using it to advance the issues that concern us in particular. We're just not doing it. And for some reason, and that's why I say we have identified with our captor. We are suffering from something here. You know, so it's very hard to understand why women are having difficulty passing the Equal Rights Amendment, the Equal Pay Amendment. We can just go down there and vote.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's true. So,
there's Belinda wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Belinda, go ahead.
I just want to say that I think that part of our kind of strategy as we move forward in thinking about an office, you know, dealing with inequities among women, especially when it comes to healthcare, is to try to figure out how do we change the narrative and broaden the base of women that we can appeal to. Because I think that when we talk about, say, for instance, healthcare covering the cost of contraceptives, right? Like when we talk about contraceptive equality and equity, people think about it as empowering teenagers to just run rampant and have sex, right? But I can remember, you know, when I was, I left the mission field to go and get my PhD in graduate school. I had a husband who was in the police academy, and we were living on about $15,000 a year, and having to shell out $25 a month for my birth control pill was a real struggle. And so I'm somebody that's trying to, quote, do it the right way, right? And delay pregnancy so that I could get my education and be able to support a child in a healthy family environment, but yet even that was a struggle. And so I think that it's, thinking about who is our audience when we're talking about equity and access, and being able to have kind of a plethora of messages that are targeted to audiences. So we can say this is not just a teenage issue about sex education and free condoms and birth control pills. This is about empowering professional women to be able to fulfill their potential. And so kind of just thinking about that we need to broaden the base, that this is, even Republican women should care about this issue. This is not just a Democratic women's issue.
Melissa, you were gonna say something else?
Well, I've been very struck by former Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And when she passed earlier this year, one of the quotes that resonated with me was to advocate in a way that brings people together or brings people to your cause. And it occurs to me that I've been doing everything wrong for about 40 years, and being too shrill or too divisive or too, us versus them or whatever. And so, I really am trying to figure out how in 2021 to sort of hear that admonition to advocate in a way that brings people to your cause. And so, how do we talk about the needs of families in Louisiana? How do we talk about what every baby needs? How do we talk about supporting families and how do we frame the things we care about in a way that people can hear it, and not just in such a negative or easily to be dismissed sort of hysterical way? And I've been accused of being hysterical for years. And so this is kind of hard for me to sort of, figure out, how do we frame these issues in a way that bring people together? Because Judge Cooks, I'm astonished that we've got, 56% of white women voted for Donald Trump. It's just humiliating. And
wait, I got to jump in on that, because that's kind of a misnomer.
Okay, Tania, jump in.
So it's 56% of the women white women who voted for Trump, but a lot of white women sat home during that election. So it was actually a minority of white women who voted for Trump, but it gets pandered about a lot. And the reason why I jump in on it is because I think when white women and black women work together, we can accomplish great things. But I think there is an effort to make sure that we are divided lately and that we don't work together. And so I think that 56% of white women is used as a way of sort of making sure that we stay alienated from one another. So sorry to jump in on you, but I did wanted to make sure
that was perfect. And I appreciate that, because that's sort of how do we bring people together is the real issue.
That may be true, but I'm still having a hard time figuring out, even if it's the women who voted, how 56% of women who voted could indeed vote for Donald Trump. This is who has.
We're all baffled by that.
I'm still having difficulty trying to explain that away.
Exactly.
I think it's it gets into the working class issues. I do. And the income inequality that's really a problem across the country. And anyway, that's another topic for another day, Dawn.
but it goes back to the issue that we talked about earlier, and that was that headmaster, because even the message went out in the election was, men, go home and tell your wife who they're supposed to vote for. So it came, and many of them probably didn't want to vote for him, but they didn't want their husbands to know that they were not going to vote for him. So that was an issue as well, because that was being pushed by the administration and by all the Trumpsters out there. Go home and tell your wives they should vote this way. And if it's almost as if saying, if they don't, you take care of it.
I wanted to go back to Melissa's question, which is, the question of the hour. It really is. And I think once we figure that out, we won't be in this place any longer. But I just wanted to also mention that Georgetown University ranks the best and worst states for women. And Louisiana, once again, is the worst state. And they look at issues such as justice, security, and inclusion, and they have specific metrics. And not only does Louisiana rank poorly, but we rank so poorly. We are so far behind. Massachusetts ranks 4 times better than Louisiana, just to give you an idea of how far behind we are as women in Louisiana. And so, you know, we are the most oppressed of the oppressed. We are the most discriminated against. I'm going to use that word because that's really what it is when you think about the inequalities, even in terms of what we're paid as women. And so it is inherent that we find a way to have these conversations so that we can bring people along and so that others can hear us and can understand this really isn't about one group against another group. It's really about all of us improving the quality of life for our children and our families, because who's suffering in this state is our children and our families.
Exactly.
Foster Ryder had mentioned, and I did make a note that I wanted to touch on identities beyond the binary. And so Foster had mentioned part of the audience is also the trans community, male to female and non-binary female assigned at birth. As someone who represents the trans community, we are large and mighty and did not vote. So that's an interesting point.
You know, even in the bill that we tried to pass, that we did pass for women's women being incarcerated, the word transgender was in that bill. They forced that word to come out of the bill in order to pass it, because they were hung up on where do we send them to prison and all of these other issues that we didn't even have to discuss, but knowing that they are taken care of in prison, that we were able to take it out of that bill. But these folks that are in the legislature now, they have all of these old time, going back to the old South, all of the ideas are coming into their heads about what we cannot do because of the fact that we are so divided racially. And when we do that, then we tend to make sure that their voices are heard because they're the loudest ones, and they have all of these other outside groups, interest groups, who will come to their rescue if they decide that they're going to do something like deciding what they're going to pass or not. So we need to make sure that we are there to make sure that those bills that we want to see passed in the legislature, that they do get passed, because and take the challenge of asking the women who go to the table to voice their opinion on issues that are against women. Why do they do so? Ask the legislative women, why do they do it? Who told them to do that? You know, be observant enough to know that they are not doing that on their own. They're actually doing it because somebody told them to do that and they believed what they said.
Well, you know, we've been trying to get women to run for the legislature for years, and finally it's all started to come together, emerge, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, lots of groups were trying to encourage women to. Belinda ran for the legislature and unfortunately was defeated in a runoff. We had 76 women candidates running for the legislature in 2019, but we only ended up with 18 women in the House and 5 in the Senate. So it was really just a net gain of 2 people in the House after all of that effort. And so if we want to talk about, you know, the role of women as elected officials, if we want to talk about changing Louisiana, you know, I think we've really got to get serious about getting women who can win to run. I'd rather run 30 women and win 30 seats than to try and run 76 and win 0. And so, you know, we're at this weird place where we've got to really create a pipeline of talent and then create the funding to give these women the resources to run successful campaigns and actually win. And so, you know, we've got to, if we're going to change the game, we have to change the players. And frankly, I don't want to give up on Louisiana, but if there's no pipeline of people to run statewide in 3 years for governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, treasurer, any of those positions, who is in any way not completely aligned with the far right Republican Party. There's not a pipeline of independent or Democratic or moderate candidates. And that's the area that I feel that we should be focusing on, in terms of, really trying to lift up those leaders around the state, whether they're already in elected positions or not, to be able to run and win.
Excellent. And so then that's a good segue, because I wanted to make sure that I doubled back and dealt with the electoral part. And so then first, Judge Cooks, go ahead. Can you share your story about what it took for you to become a judge, legally, etc.?
Well, it took a whole lot of groundwork to become a judge in Louisiana. I first started off, I ran for 2 times, I believe, prior, ultimately 3 times, I believe, prior to my success. But my success came as a result of a suit filed under Section 2 and 5 of the Voting Rights Act, demanding participation, equal participation in the election of judges in the state. It required remapping of the state in order to accomplish that, because prior to that time, the votes had been gerrymandered to our disadvantage. They had, for example, diluted the strength of the minority community in particular by placing them in an area that would give the majority to the other side. And so it was next to impossible to elect a minority judge in many areas throughout the state of Louisiana. So I became, I suppose, the example of that through the litigation, of how difficult it was to overcome those barriers, no matter how hard you tried and how educated you might be and how well you might have done in life. It was difficult to overcome those barriers. And so it resulted in Black folks not meaningfully participating in the election process, in the election of judges. We ultimately were successful in that. And so I guess the 3rd time is always a charm, and I succeeded because the lines were drawn differently. And it accounts for many of the minority judges currently serving on the bench. Reapportionment, of course, is coming around again. And that is the danger zone. Will we continue what we have now and continue the gains we are making? Or will others who are currently serving in office see it another way and reimpose all those things that made it very difficult for minorities to succeed? But we'll wait for that. That is a battle we will have to fight.
And so I remember when I did used to go to the state capitol, where my advocacy work took me to the state capitol every session, and being in those circles. And I remember at that time, and so this is 6-7 years ago, so 7 to 10 years ago, that time span. And I remember conversations with women and there being a sentiment of, at least in the Democratic Party, and really not so much party, but also within the African American community. My experience, and others can chime in, who I had the pleasure of meeting and growing close to during that time, I would hear women say, white women in particular, that it appeared that Black women were more supported and encouraged to run for office in the Black community, and to an equal extent in the Democratic Party. Over time, more recently, and I suppose it can be attributed to national sentiments, it almost seems the opposite is going on right now within the past couple of election cycles. It's like just like that backlash effect, perhaps, in race, that racial progress. When Obama was elected, and 2008, Obama was elected, and then and he did his 2 terms, and it was like the rubber band was pulling back, and then here we go with Trump, and they just, and so then to some extent, or at least I can look around locally and see, and even in my own experience, and see some of that same thing, and knowing that I've had conversations myself, and I'll just speak for myself, with white men in power, and them expressing as if Black women had taken over, when you look at it statistically, it was no such thing. But that feeling was there, right? Kind of like how some of us feel about the whole, those that are supportive, or what the media portrays as those who are supportive of Trump, because I do think the media is unfairly attributes that support to poor whites, but obviously it's more than just poor whites that voted for Trump. Okay, but that sentiment that okay, if I see somebody else getting close to equal to me in their gains, then oh my God, something must be happening to me. I see that also in electoral politics, locally and statewide, within the Black community, and that's discouraging to me. For some of the same reasons we mentioned a little earlier. But I just kind of wanted to lift that up, that that there was a time in the not too distant past that Black women appeared to be more supported. And then the idea then would be, well, let us all, support each other, so that sentiment, so that it wouldn't just be Black women that appeared to be supported, right? But instead of going in that direction, it just kind of went the opposite way. And again, looking at it in pure statistic terms, yes, we were more supported, but overall, women, period, regardless of race, still have not really broken that barrier of even being close to being equally represented. And so, any thoughts? Anybody remember any of those conversations?
Well, I can tell you the one that I had, and I think I related it to you. I'm sorry, I related to
you. No,
you.
you go, Pat, and then I'll say what you can't say.
Okay. But even amongst our own people, because it was point blank told to me that we have too many Black women in East Baton Rouge Parish in high positions, and that they couldn't support me during my race for Senate, and said that they needed a man down there because a man could cause a ruckus. And the interesting part about it is that I asked him, where was he for the past 12 years? Because I was the only one causing the ruckus down there at one point in time. And I said, the men had their chance. They didn't cause a ruckus when they were in there. So now all of a sudden you want to say that those of us who are there, who've been called militant, who've been called too outspoken, who just are just not who our Republican friends wanted to see there. Now all of a sudden, we are the outcasts. We don't want you in there. And that's happening. So you find that, yes, they are, even amongst our own, they will tend to crawfish and bring somebody down. But as a global kind of situation, you're absolutely right, because about the groups that started to come together to help promote individuals for running for office, there were many more non-Blacks who were in those groups rather than there were Blacks. And so it tended to show that they were, if they were going to be elected, they would be elected prior to or before those individuals who are Black, because they were running in areas where they had a little more support, women's support underneath them. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to look for, is women supporting women, because when women vote, women win.
Alyssa, may I go next? Because I feel compelled to speak on this. What happened in that Senate race with Representative Smith is a classic example of what happens to minorities and to women who the mainstream wants to keep oppressed, wants to keep powerless. And we, and I'm talking about we now as Black folks, Black people, we don't do our homework enough. We're not educated enough to understand what is really transpiring. What happened in that race was not about the fact that Representative Smith was not doing a good job down there, because she was, and we all know that. It was because the opponents, her Republican, the other party, the GOP, did not like the job she was doing. And so they wanted to get her out. Okay, they wanted to block her from moving into that Senate seat. They did not want someone who was effective and who represented their constituency in that position. So they supported her opponent.
Right.
They financed, were the largest contributor and financer of her opponent to block her from getting that seat. I mean, we just need to tell the truth. I mean, the truth needs to be told. We got to stop soft pedaling and dancing around and playing, you know, pretending like everything is okay when it's not okay. There's no reason that that should have happened that way. Now, it would be nice if we had Cleo and Pat in the Senate. I would have no problem with that. But the way that Senate race went and the outcome should not have happened. And we as Black people should not have been used, manipulated to get that outcome to happen, to cause that outcome to happen that way. And I'll leave it there.
Well, yeah, and you're right, we shouldn't soft pedal. And I did soft pedal when I mentioned that I've had conversations with white men. And I soft pedaled in the sense of, I immediately connected the dots myself and said, okay, you done let these people yang, yang, yang all in your ear because they're probably tired of their wives, their sisters, their whomever, looking at the Black women and saying they want that support too, among other, yes, the party, Republican Party stuff, yes, but just on a more intimate level, right? And so then, the men could cause a ruckus. We don't hear the angry Black man trope. Right. There's no angry Black man trope. There's an angry Black woman trope, right? Or the men can have conversations with the white men. I found out more information from the white men than some of the brothers. And I'm sure many of us can say the same thing. So what's the real? And so go ahead, Melissa, because two people cut in front of you. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Melissa.
I'm sorry, Melissa.
You said what needed to be said, and God bless you for it. But that's playing out right this red hot second in this mayor's race. And let's just be real clear about it. What's going on in East Baton Rouge?
Exactly right.
And we all need to get behind Sharon Weston Broome and get her elected. And unfortunately, there's some women in our community that are working against her, that are throwing in with the Republicans, that are causing mess out in the community. You know, I mean, we have got to get Sharon Weston Broome elected mayor of Rouge. And it frustrates me, but it all comes down to money, power, and ego, whether you're black, white, male, or female. And politics ain't beanbag. But, you know, we're facing some really tough issues around messaging and voter turnout and, you know, getting women elected and keeping them elected into some of these offices. And so, you know, I just get really concerned when we sort of eat our own for whatever purpose motivates us.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So that was my little rant for the day.
Okay, sounds
Trying to be
good.
on good
Sounds
behavior.
amazing. Belinda, did you want to talk more about your experience as a candidate when you ran?
Unmute. Unmute. Okay.
You know, I'll say just a couple of things. I think that probably the most, I've run for office now twice, and the first was in a special election for the school board race. And that was probably kind of one of the most disheartening races, you know, because I feel like, and in some respects, I can relate to you, Representative Smith, that like you put in the work and you labored in the House. And I felt like I had labored along with Tania Nyman at the Capitol trying to help the East Baton Rouge Parish public school system survive the creation of an almost exclusively all-white and wealthy school district. And I was defeated by a man who I'd never seen at a school board meeting before, who had not been advocating for our school system at the Capitol, but he walked in and he won because he was a white male. And it was really interesting when we were talking about, when people were speaking on our behalves at the school board race for an appointment to a special election. And his wife talked about how I reminded her of herself with my passion, and that what she had found was that Mr. Gaudet was able to come beside her and help her achieve her goals with his strategy. And I was, you know, and I understood her heart, right, was in the right place. But at the same time, I have my passion. I have the ability to get my strategy and my goals on my own. And so like, it was a real blow. But I will say that my run for the legislature, you know, was a very positive experience. I got, you know, just under 48% of the vote. And I think that the thing that I proved to myself was that I could raise money, that putting in the call time and doing the hard work. I mean, my problem was just name recognition, but I'm not going away. I may run for that seat again in a couple of years, just because I think we need more women in our legislature. And quite frankly, we need more white Democrats in our legislature. If you look at the East Baton Rouge Parish Democratic Party, we're almost exclusively comprised of minorities. And you know, and I'll be frank too, the East Baton Rouge Parish public school system would have been destroyed if not for the partnership of between the Black Caucus in the House and One Community, One School District and Beyond Bricks and these education advocacy groups. I mean, we owe our survival to the Black Caucus in the House and the way that we were able to come together and work for our school district. And I just wish that there were, you know, that there were more Black Democrats and white Democrats elected to our legislature, our Metro Council. I mean, we've got a real race problem in the East Baton Rouge Parish Party, and that's in large part because white Democrats, I think we've been hiding, right? We exist, but we've been concerned that we could not compete. But if you look at Tania Nyman in the Metro Council right now, I mean, she got, what was it, Tania, like 40-something% of the vote. And so she's a real competitor for winning that Metro Council seat. And so what I hope that my race shows and what her race is showing is that, you know, white Democrats can be competitive in the city of Baton Rouge. And, you know, we have to make sure, as Judge Cook said, we have to watch redistricting because they will be watching how competitive our races were. And we need to make sure that they're not gerrymandering those districts to make them less competitive.
Absolutely. And to some of your point early on, Belinda, I remember the community support that you had because of the work that you did at the school board. And it was tough because we actually couldn't come to a decision that night. We had to do it again and in enough time before the governor would appoint, you know. And I remember who is now my colleague on the school board, Mr. Gode, just turning red with anger and embarrassment that you had that much community support. And I'm quite sure he felt, and he and I get along just fine. I'm not trying to demean him in any way, but it was what it is what it was, you know. I think he walked in as a white man who was accomplished in his own right, you know, retired from Albemarle and, you know, traveled the world, and he did, you know, serve on the board of a Thrive, you know, so some exposure to what was going on with schools, but you know, there was no comparison with the experience and time that you had put in, Belinda, in the public school sphere. It was just none. But somehow, emotionally, for him, that was hard, and mentally, that was hard for him to grapple. Like it really, you know, I watched his facial expression, and I watched his anger, and I watched him literally turn red during much of that. And he just, I don't know that he had ever been challenged, if you will, in such a way. And it just, you know, I just wanted to lift that up as an example of the battle of the sexes. You know?
I want to talk about Belinda's race a little bit, because of course I was helping to organize the speakers and come out and talk for Belinda and support to try to get her appointed. And the number of speakers we had show up for her outnumbered the number of speakers for him, like 4 to 5 times the number of speakers. And but going back to what Judge Cook was pointing out too about the apportionment of our seats, if the business community had not compelled our school board to be reapportioned following the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, Belinda would be in that seat, because they dropped it from 11 to 9 seats and then gerrymandered those districts so that she would have had the votes on the board when they had 11 seats. And it was only because it was down to 9 and the way in which those seats were apportioned that we didn't have the votes for her. And then when she ran in that special election, if turnout had been higher in the districts that were in her favor, she would have won that seat. I mean, poor Belinda had to put up with me as I wasn't even her official campaign manager. I didn't know what I was doing. Hint, I kind of still don't. I'm learning on the fly. And she still got a lot of the vote. So it was, if she had been in a regular election, I think she would have won it. So all of those things kind of go into play. She didn't have a lot of money in that special election. There was nobody's coattails to ride the get out the vote wave. And all of those things come into play. So yeah, you know, just want to say that, all those things.
So look, it is 3:55. I really enjoyed the discussion. Did anybody do y'all want to go around with everybody have a closing thought? Okay. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order. Let me not challenge myself in that way. Let me just go in order of appearance on the screen. Rep Smith, Miss Pat.
Yes, this has been quite enlightening, and enjoy talking with all of you. It's good meeting you, Judge Cook, but everybody else on this in this venue. I've had opportunities to work for and work with on their particular journey. So it's good to hear conversations about how we can move forward. And I'm going to be doing some of that myself, trying to move forward, get out. I'm not running for the Senate again. I just want y'all to know that. I'm not going to run for the Senate. I've made my mind up on that. I've got bigger and better things.
How about Congress? There's a seat coming open.
I don't think so. But we do need to make sure that we galvanize the women who are willing to be out there to do things, because sometimes there are a lot of young women who want to get involved in things, but they don't know how to go about it. And we've got to continue to put forth the educational piece to have them help in elections, not necessarily run because they may not want to run, but to learn the processes, to go down to the Capitol and understand what's happening, to go to Metro Council and find out what's happening. A lot of them are doing that, but we've got to nurture them and have them be ready for the next millennium that's coming in, or whatever they call themselves now. They're millenniums, they were Gen X, and I don't know what they are, but but I know that there's going to be a different group and different mindset of young people coming forward. We've got to make sure to keep them engaged.
Judge Cooks?
I think we have a lot of work to do. We have to get to that legislature, and we have to pay close attention to where these districts are going to be drawn, how they're going to be rearranged, and and how they're going to be gerrymandered. I don't have any doubt about it. We have to stop.
Right. Exactly.
We have to join together and do something. Talk is good, but action is powerful.
Tania?
I can't tell who's on your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things, little follow-up for, I ran for that school board seat against Godet in the regular election. And I didn't want him getting elected because he was unopposed. And I spent less than $4,000 in that race. It qualified the last day. And he spent, I believe I was told, he spent $40,000 from his own campaign fund, and they had $60,000 spent in support of him through the PACs. So nearly $100,000 for a school board seat against my little $4,000. And I got 42% of the vote. Now, I lost, but to me, that was clearly an indication that if it took 100K to beat me, that was a winnable seat. So yeah, I'm running now for the Metro Council. It's really important to me, though, that we figure out how to win these seats without so much money. Because the fact is that moneyed interests will be able to outspend any kind of candidate, and we need to make sure we have candidates that are responsive and advocates for the people, for average citizens, and we need to re-engage those average citizens in this process so that we can run these races more cost effectively with active participation from people who want to see real change. Because if we have to raise a lot of money, then we're going to have to be beholden to that money, and we're not going to be able to actually address the inequities in our system. So we'll see, December 5th.
All right, Melissa.
Well, I just want to thank Belinda and Tania for running for these offices. And I want to thank you too, Dawn, for convening us together, and also mention that you're in a runoff for the Metro Council. And it would make a huge difference if we had Mayor Sharon Weston Broome and Dawn Collins and Tania Nyman on the Metro Council. And so, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be with y'all today. And I'm hopeful and optimistic about the future of Louisiana because of the women that are on the screen and those that care enough to tune in. And I think we just have to, keep marching onward and not give up. So thank you.
Belinda.
I'll just say two things. One, remember that statistically speaking, women have to be asked multiple times before they'll say yes to running for office. And statistically speaking, they have to lose a couple of times before they win. And so I'd like to thank Representative Smith, because after I lost that school board race, she encouraged me to not give up and to keep putting myself out there, because Louisiana needed more elected women officials who had the best interest of people at heart, like Tania said. And so I would just say, encourage the women in your life who are out there fighting the good fight to think about running themselves.
To get in good trouble.
That's right, good trouble. Alma.
So thank you. I get to be the closer here. So I'm going to bring us back to our topic, actually, as we close out, which is about the women's suffrage and our right to vote as women, which we now have had for 100 years. And as we turn this decade, I want to just encourage all women really to recommit to this movement, because we haven't accomplished equality yet. 100 years later, we still have not accomplished equality as women. We're in fact far from it. And so the movement really needs to be, we need to get behind this movement. I don't know how we do that, but one thing I know is that we need to do it together. I started out saying that as we turn this century on women's voting rights, it's important, it's imperative that we focus on both gender and racial equality, not just gender equality or not just racial equality, but both, because we're lagging behind in both. And so I think it's important to get out the vote. Our exercising our vote is so very, very critical. Mm-hmm. And we do have an election coming up in a few weeks, a couple of weeks. Please get out and vote. Go vote. And also staying engaged. Once we get people in office, our job is not over. They need to hear from us. It's so very important that we stay connected and we continue to educate them and to help and support them. Because, you know, when you're in that position, I know Rep. Smith and Melissa and all of you on here who have held political office. I never have. I've always been on the policy side. But those of you in those offices, it's difficult for you to know it and have all the information on all of the issues that come before you as a legislator or a policy maker. And so it's inherent upon people like me in my role to help bring the facts and the information and help educate. And that's what we try to do. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with this Office on Women's Health. And so my last comment is just to say, let's continue the movement. Well, let me ask again for people to sign the petition to establish this Louisiana Office on Women's Health. And we put down, you've shared the petition to do that. That's a small win that we can accomplish as women if we really come together to make it happen. Let's make it happen. And then finally, let's continue this movement for economic and political equality, for the social reforms in unity to shape the next 100 years.
Excellent. And so I will actually read some comments that Ms. Jane Chandler had put in the past couple of minutes. She mentioned that we have a legacy legislature. Seats are passed from father to son or uncle to nephew. The names on the roster now much the same as in 1972 when they were trying to pass the ERA. Very, very important point to mention. And then she had mentioned, Alma, that you were right, and that's happening in local parish government too, i.e. GOP candidates promising stuff to Democrats who are politically ambitious. And then I think her last comment was, we used to have a women in politics organization. After COVID, we need a women's conference where we can bring these issues forward, providing training for women who want to run for office. Now, Ms. Chandler, there is a Emerge is a organization that they just got a new executive director for, and Emerge Louisiana has that as their primary goal, getting women to run for office and training women how to run for office. And then she said, this conversation was so good, and I'm so happy to hear women's voices speaking up and bringing gender issues back to the forefront. And then my little closing thoughts are, yes, I am running for Metro Council December 5th. Some of those dynamics are at play that we discussed earlier, and it's unfortunate. People should just be able to vote for the folks that's working hard without that being part of the motivation. And I don't say that to say my opponent doesn't work hard. I'm saying that people should just be able to deal with that issue. And that should be enough cause for folks to be inspired to run and folks to be inspired to vote. And on being inspired to run, as Sister Belinda said a little earlier, it takes several times to ask a woman to run for office. In fact, I'm one of those women who used to help other people get into office, and I still help other people get into office. And I never thought at first that I would run for office myself. So I'm sharing with anyone that's viewing that, sister, if you're head of the PTO, if you're the lead mom of the soccer team, if you are the head of the Jack and Jill, if you lead your fraternity locally, or your sorority, excuse me, locally, then you are a leader. If you're the head of the usher board, you are a leader. Okay. And so why not lead the good citizens of your neighborhood and your metro council district or your state rep district or your school board district? Run, 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 run. Right. All right. Thank you all again for joining me. I really enjoyed this, and I know others are going to enjoy it as well.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Alma, for bringing the truth to light.
Thank you, Alma.
Try to speak truth.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
All right.
Don. Nice being with you.
Thank you, Don. Yes.
All right, Auntie.